Welcome to the overview session of the fiscal year 2016 STOP VAWA Grant Program. I'm Mary Wills and I am your STOP Administrator. The topics that we're going to cover will be the due date and the timeline, the submission process, who is eligible, the purpose, priorities, requirements. We'll briefly go over some allowable versus unallowable costs and the attachments that you will need to submit with your application. Important dates. January 9th, 2017 is the date that the application is due to the Crime Commission, and it has to be here by 5 p.m. Everything that you have to submit, your email submission, if you deliver it or if you mail it in, it all has to be here by January 9th at 5 p.m. March 30th, the Crime Commission will have their grant review subcommittee. It's actually a subcommittee, and they will hold a public meeting, which means that you are able to attend. And at that point, they will walk through the grant applications and make an initial recommendation for funding. Following that, by April 6th, there should be a letter. We will mail out letters on April 6th, at least by that time, to applicants on what their recommended funding levels are. And then on May 5th, the Crime Commission will hold their public meeting and make final funding recommendations. The letter that you get on April 6th, what's important about that, it not only tells you about your recommended funding level, but it also tells you about the appeal process, if that's something that you want to pursue. So you'll want to pay attention to that. Let's talk about submitting of your application. You will be submitting this application to marcella.johnson@nebraska.gov. And she will be accepting your applications. What you'll want to do is, in the email to Marcella, you're going to attach your PDF version of the complete application. When I say complete, that means you'll have all your attachments in that document, and you will have all your authorized signatures where they're required. You'll want to label that attached document as 2016 STOP with your agency's name. And then in the email subject line, oh, wait a minute. You will want to label the document with your agency's name. In the email subject line, you'll want to put 2016 STOP with your agency's name. Sorry about that. And then you will want to mail or deliver by the due date and the time the original and one hard copy. Your hard copy needs to be have all the attachments with it, as does your original. Okay, let's touch base on who is eligible. This is pretty straightforward, simple. State and local units of government, Indian tribal governments, and nonprofit, non-governmental victim services providers. The purpose of the STOP program is to help victims across their lives and to provide them with the protection and the services they need to pursue safe and healthy lives while improving communities' capacity to hold offenders accountable. STOP does this by using a multifaceted approach in Nebraska. What that looks like for us is our coordinated response teams That's the strategy that we emphasize across the state. The STOP purpose areas, there are 20 areas that you should be aware of. You can find them in the application on pages 5 through 7. And then also you can see them in the Nebraska STOP implementation plan for 2014 through 2016 on pages 18 and 23. In both of those places, you'll find that, especially in the plan, it will talk about the priorities within those areas. So when you're looking at your project and the type of funding that what you're wanting to do with the funds, then you're going to want to make sure that it fits into one of those purpose areas. And then here is the website to the state STOP implementation plan. Priorities under STOP, of course, it's the crimes of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence. We're also looking at helping victims achieve economic security. We're looking at evidence-based and best practices around trauma-informed and how we help victims heal from the trauma. Culturally specific services, increased safety for victims, and increased offender accountability. And of course, overall, we're looking at coordinated responses. When you're looking at priorities and also looking at ways to indicate Nebraska's issues, I also suggest you look at the Nebraska Strategic Plan for Victims and Survivors of Crime that came out the last part of 2015. Here is the website for that. And in that plan, it does prioritize the crimes that are relevant under STOP. So if you haven't looked at that or reviewed that, I would highly recommend it. Let's look at some of the requirements. Of course, these are a federal grant, and it has a ton of requirements. But for this particular one, some of the things that I pulled out are the coordination is very relevant. It is an allowable activity that you can request funds for. Because these are federal dollars, they have to, they're intended to supplement other funding, and that's why we have the supplemental funding chart. As an agency, you must have internal fiscal controls that are going to show that there's a clear audit trail for each source of funding, which also would mean you would have written policies and procedures. You would have records to document your fiscal controls. It's important that subrecipients understand that they receive payments on a reimbursement basis through this federal program. You also have to be able to meet all the federal requirements that are contained within the special conditions that come with the award. Those would include things like civil rights non-discrimination, limited English proficiency plans, confidentiality. There are several relevant issues under the VAWA Act that fall within your special conditions. You must have a DUNS number, so if that's something that you don't have, then you would want to start that process. You also must be registered in the system for award management, and you have to be able to conduct business with the U.S. government. So if you've been debarred from doing any type of business with the U.S. government, you would not be able to receive federal dollars. Okay, here is a list of allowables and unallowables. Of course, there's, if you drill each of these topics down, you may have additional questions, and I will be available to answer any of those questions. But legal services are an allowable activity. As you can see on the other side, unallowable is legal and defense services for perpetrators. First month's rent for a domestic violence victim as part of the provision of transitional housing. There's reasonable transportation costs to enhance the victim's safety. On the other side, you cannot use stop dollars for moving expenses or acquiring furniture or housing in a new location. Law enforcement efforts, all of the law enforcement, the courts, prosecution, they're all focused on the relevant crimes under STOP. However, as you can see, under law enforcement, the purchase of standard issue law enforcement items is not allowable. Victim services, this is a large category, and you can support culturally specific services, services to underserved populations, services to inmates who are victims of sexual assault. Age group for STOP is 11 and older, and then it also includes secondary victims, or family members or children, that sort of thing. Of course, I already mentioned the coordination. It supports better intervention programming, the meaningful sexual assault services, training opportunities, healthcare providers' time conducting forensic exams, violence prevention programs, media campaigns, and so forth. Items that it doesn't fund, of course, it's those conference and training items such as purchasing food and drinks for meetings, lobbying, fundraising, research projects. You cannot purchase a vehicle under this grant program. It will not pay for substance abuse counseling or voucher programs or any type of renovation or construction. All right, let's move on to talk about the attachments. The attachments for this particular grant are going to be memorandums of commitment and letters of support. If you are submitting indirect cost, there are, you would have a couple attachments depending on what type of indirect cost you're looking at. Your CRT plan, if you are a new applicant or if you have an update. There's a flow chart needed, proof of nonprofit status, and then there's a couple certifications that are attached to the application. Memorandums of commitment and letters of support. If you are submitting as a CRT, you'll want to provide copies of your members' MOCs. If you are not submitting as a CRT, I would suggest that you provide a copy of your own MOC as a member of a CRT. That was a little too many acronyms. Letters of support or an MOC must be provided from victim services providers showing that they were consulted with on the development of this grant application. Now, the MOC that's contained with the grant application, the example, does have that as a bullet point that they were consulted with. You do not need to submit a letter of support and an MOC from the same agency. If you have an MOC, that will suffice. Just know that if letters of support are sent separately into the Crime Commission, they cannot be considered or returned. If you have a victim who writes a letter of support, you will want to have all identifying victim information blacked out. Letters that are from crime commissioners or employees at the crime commission will need to be removed because that would reflect a conflict of interest. Okay, I don't want you to forget about that flow chart and your CRT plan. So your flow chart is included as part of your solutions section, and it should provide an overview of the community coordination process and your response for sexual assault. That flow chart should not look the same as your response for domestic violence. If they are one, it should be very clear as to how sexual assault is handled somewhat differently than domestic violence. CRT plan. Again, if you're a new applicant, you would want to submit a plan, or if you've had an update, please provide that. Okay, those certified assurances have to be signed and dated. There's 2 of them. You have that lobbying, debarment, suspension, drug-free workplace thing going on. So be sure both of those forms get signed. The disclosure of pending applications, there's a little chart at the very end. You either have to complete it and provide necessary information, or you're going to indicate none on the chart. Just don't leave it blank, because then I don't know if you missed it. You will have to complete the chart if you're getting federal and or state grant funds, where you're well, let's say you've applied for federal or state grant funds where the request is the same as this project, and it will cover the identical cost items outlined in the budget. And then if so, you'll have to fill out the chart. Your proof of nonprofit status. If you're a nonprofit, you'll need to submit that, and you can have one of 3 forms. Your 501c3 designation letter, or perhaps you have a letter from the state taxing body or the attorney general, or you could have a state certification of your incorporation. If you're doing indirect cost, you're either going to be submitting the paperwork that shows that you have a federally approved indirect cost rate and what is all within that rate and what's allowed. Or if you're going on a 10% de minimis rate, you will need to submit your agency's policy, and you will need to submit a letter certifying that you've never had a federally approved indirect cost rate. There's more on that indirect cost under the budget session that's provided. Okay, that ends our session for the overall, or the overview session. If you need any further assistance, you can just simply call me, you can email me. I will gladly do an individual session with you. I will, however you need your technical assistance provided, please let me know. I'm here to help. Thank you very much.